Hey Mama, welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, wife, mama of 3, and doctor of the PhD kind. On this podcast, we talk honestly about high achievement, burnout, and what it looks like to lead well across home, work, and self. So if you're an ambitious mother scholar who's quietly exhausted by the pace you've been keeping and starting to realize that survival isn't the same as success, this podcast is for you. Mrs. Mummy PhD began during my own PhD journey as a wife and mama. Today, as a postdoctoral scholarly mama working across 2 leadership roles, this work has evolved. It's no longer just about finishing the PhD well, it's about creating sustainable ways of learning, leading, and living at any stage of your journey without losing yourself in the process. If you're ready to move from survival to restoration, you're in the right place. Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. Hey Mama, welcome back to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Of course, as I always say, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so you don't miss a single episode. So we've been back to the podcast, as I mentioned last week, since my little short break, and it has been wonderful. It's been wonderful to be back. It's been wonderful to be recording again. But in this episode, I want to speak specifically, because we talked in last week's episode about myths that are keeping you stuck in survival mode, and we talked through 4 of those myths. And so today I want to speak to the concept of boundaries feeling really selfish. If you're anything like me, you've probably said no to something this week, but you've been feeling guilty about saying no ever since. You've been replaying the conversation in your head. You've been wondering if you're just being selfish by saying no. You're questioning whether you should have just, given in and said yes. And so I want to speak to that in this episode. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand why boundaries feeling selfish is actually a sign that you are doing the right thing. And you'll see the difference between boundaries feeling selfish and actually reframing them into being self-led. So changing this narrative of being selfish into being self-led. And you will have permission to protect your capacity without feeling like you need to apologize for doing that. So today we're talking about why boundaries feel so uncomfortable. Because they do feel uncomfortable, especially us people pleasers. Boundaries feel uncomfortable. So we're going to talk about why they do and why that discomfort might actually be the point, might actually be almost reinforcing the need to have those boundaries. So last week we talked about being stuck in survival mode. But what about being stuck in yes mode? You've been trained to say yes. And so you feel guilty every time you protect your time, every time you protect your energy, you feel really guilty about it. And maybe you worry about setting boundaries because that makes you feel like you're being difficult or you're not committed or you're being selfish. And this is really important for me to talk about because I know what this feels like. I've lived this, tension between wanting to set boundaries for my own self, but also not wanting to let other people down. And I've said yes when I, wanted to say no. And I've apologized for saying that no. So I'm saying no, but it's also coming with an apology, right? And I've had to unlearn this belief that my worth is tied to my productivity, but more importantly, to my availability, right? And so from my own journey of setting boundaries and sitting with this discomfort, I want to speak about why this is so important, because I've had so many conversations with scholarly mamas who are really scared of being perceived as being selfish. And I'm also having to learn my own self that having feelings of guilt doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. So let me tell you why I think boundaries feel so selfish and why I want to talk about this in this episode. So I think boundaries feel selfish mainly because you've created this habit of trying to accommodate, right? Trying to be helpful, to be available, to be flexible, and to not be too much and not ask for too much, to put everybody else's needs before your own. And I think this is particularly pertinent for high achieving women because you achieve what you've achieved because you said yes to something. You said yes to an opportunity. You said yes to people supporting you. You said yes to the help. You said yes to the challenge, right? That got you where you are. And you may be known for being the reliable one. You may be known for the one who goes above and beyond, but never actually thinking about your own self in all of that because you don't want to let other people down. And like I mentioned in the previous episode, as mamas, this is even more prevalent because that cultural messaging says that good mums, we sacrifice for our kids, we sacrifice for our children, we put their needs before our own, and we don't have needs, but if we do, that they need to come last, right? And so when you set a boundary, it feels uncomfortable, it feels like you're being difficult, it feels wrong, it feels, like you're letting people down, it feels selfish. And here's what makes it even worse. Other people may actually tell you that you're just thinking about yourself, or they may be disappointed, or they may push back, or they may push even harder and try to guilt trip you because they're so used to you saying yes. They're so used to you being the yes person. And so the guilt that you feel is real because you may be thinking, well, who am I to say no? That's a great opportunity. Who am I to say no? What will other people think of me? Am I being unreasonable by not agreeing to do this or not agreeing to saying yes to this? Or you may be just thinking, you know what, I'm just going to say yes and just do it and just, live with the consequences of that. And so this makes sense because you have been potentially rewarded for accommodating everyone. You have been praised for being flexible and helpful and selfless and giving of yourself. And now you're doing something different. Now you're not saying yes. Now you're telling us you can't do this. Now you are being difficult and awkward. Of course, that's going to feel uncomfortable. Of course, that's going to feel like you're doing something wrong. But here's the truth. The guilt doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. But what it does mean is that you are changing a pattern. You're changing a behavior. And change always feels uncomfortable at first. Like none of us like to kind of just change for the sake of changing. It feels uncomfortable. It feels threatening to us, right? And so the gentle reframe that I want to offer is, what if this wasn't at all you being selfish? What if it's just those uncomfortable feelings? What if those were just something that you feel because this is unfamiliar to you? And so it's not something that you've been taught to do or tried previously. This idea of choosing yourself. And so instead of thinking this is uncomfortable, I'm doing something wrong, I should just go ahead and say yes. Maybe it's you saying it just feels uncomfortable because I am doing something different. And this is new, right? So let's talk about the difference between, as I mentioned, selfish and self-led, because I think we have been confusing these two things. So for me, being selfish is being concerned only with oneself at the expense of other people, taking no regard for the impact of your actions on other people, disregarding other people's needs entirely. That is what selfish is, and that's not the goal here. That's not the goal. The goal is to be self-led. And for me, what that means is choosing yourself without abandoning other people, protecting your capacity so that you can show up where it matters, leading yourself toward what's actually sustainable, and making decisions based on alignment rather than approval. That is, for me, being self-led. So selfish is where you say, I'm not considering you at all. And self-led is, I'm considering myself as well, right? I'm considering myself too. And the truth is that for most of your life, you've probably been taught to consider everybody else. So when you finally start to consider yourself too, it feels selfish. But self-leadership requires you to matter in these equations, right? You cannot lead yourself if you don't value yourself. You can't protect your capacity if you think that everybody else's needs should come first and they're more important than your own. And you can't create sustainable success if you are constantly running on empty. So these boundaries that we create, they're not selfish. What if they're the most responsible thing you can do for yourself and also for the people you love and your family, your kids, you name it? Because here's what nobody tells you. Nobody tells you that a burnt out, depleted version of you, like I said in last week's episode, does not serve anyone, including you. Doesn't serve your children, doesn't serve your work, doesn't serve your relationships. And so that boundary that you are setting that feels like being selfish might actually be the thing that allows you to show up better where it matters and to actually serve well. So let's talk about what this actually means in practice, because you may be thinking like, okay, that sounds great, but how do I actually implement that, right? And so a good example of this is my recent boundary, which is me returning to part-time work from full-time work. From the outside, people assume that this is an easy decision for me to make. It was absolutely not, because on top of the actual financial cost of it, an opportunity cost of it, I also felt like I was letting people down. I was worried about how things would pan out work-wise in terms of responsibilities that I have. I felt like I was being selfish for choosing my family over my career. And I felt like I was admitting in some way that this full-time work wasn't really for me, that I couldn't handle that and also show up where I needed to show up at home. And so the guilt was really real. And I think, in my mind, in my quiet moments, I was thinking, what are my colleagues going to think? What are they thinking? Do they think I'm uncommitted? Do they think that I'm throwing away opportunities? And who am I to reduce my hours when other people are managing? I'm the only part-time person in my team now. Like, everyone is full-time. And in both roles, like, most people are working more hours than I am. And so I had to really get honest with myself and ask, like, what is the cost of not setting this boundary? It's not just about what people are going to think, but what is the actual cost to me of not setting this boundary? What am I sacrificing? What am I sacrificing by saying yes to everything and keeping this going for as long as I can? Who am I when I am running on empty? Am I able to fully show up as my authentic self when I'm feeling burnt out? And I think for me, when I answered those questions, the thoughts that came to me were, I'm actually sacrificing presence with my kids, sacrificing my health. I was sacrificing the version of me who could, lead well and show up fully. And I was giving everybody a depleted version of myself. And so the shift that I had to make for myself was that the boundary wasn't selfish. It was self-led. That decision was not a selfish decision. It was actually self-leadership in action. It was me choosing sustainability over survival. It was me deciding that my capacity really mattered here as well. And so in reality, it meant that some people didn't understand, and that was okay. It meant that some people, maybe they haven't said it to me, but maybe there's a hint of disappointment there. That's fine too. But I got my space back. I got my presence back. I got myself back. And so for me, the lesson here is that the boundary that feels selfish is often the one that you actually need the most, because it's the one that protects or restores really what you have been sacrificing, right? And so maybe you have got some boundaries that you've been avoiding because you think they feel selfish. I want you to ask yourself, what are you sacrificing by not setting that boundary? What is the cost of not setting that boundary? So let's talk about how you can kind of implement these boundaries when you are drowning in guilt, right? So the first thing that I had to do was actually name what I am protecting and restoring. When you set a boundary, what are you actually protecting? And this matters because boundaries are not just about saying no. They're about saying yes to something else. So you're saying no to one thing, but you're saying yes to something else. So when you know what you are actually protecting or restoring, it makes that easier, so that guilt has, less power over the decision itself. And so examples of this might be that you're protecting your capacity to show up well for your kids. You're protecting your mental health. You're protecting time for the work that actually matters outside of your, employed paid work. You are protecting rest, opportunity to rest, so that you don't burn out. So before you can set a boundary, ask yourself, what am I actually saying yes to? I'm saying no to this thing so that I can say yes to this other thing. And what this does is it shifts that kind of selfish mindset to one of intention. It reminds you that boundaries are there to serve a specific purpose. They're allowing you to say yes to something that actually matters to you. And when the guilt starts to raise its ugly head, just remembering what you're protecting helps to ground you again in why. Why are you saying no to that thing? I'm saying no to this committee so I can say yes to finishing my research. I'm saying no to this weekend obligation so I can say yes to rest. I'm saying no to being available 24/7 so I can say yes to presence with my family. So you're not taking something away from people, you're protecting something that matters to you. And so the second thing that I had to do that really helped me to kind of shift my mindset about this is separating worth from availability. So like I said, a lot of us are sitting on this belief that our value is in our availability. So the more available we are, the more valuable we are, the more we're worth to the team. No one can function without us. Like, they need us in the team because we're always available and we're always doing all the things. And the more I say yes, the more valuable I am. If I'm not always accessible, that means I'm not being committed. I'm not the committed one. And so this can be problematic for us as high achieving scholarly mamas, because our worth is not measured in how much we show up and how available we are. Our value is not tied to our willingness to overextend ourselves and do more than is required. We're not more valuable when we burn out, right? Because our worth is inherent within us. Like, it doesn't increase when we say yes, it doesn't decrease when we say no. So when this guilty feeling comes along, you just say, my worth is not dependent on my available hours of the day, or whether I'm emailing late at night or I'm writing reports late at night. Like, that availability 24/7 does not determine my worth. So let's imagine somebody asks you to take on another project. You could respond to that person and say something like, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I don't have that capacity at the moment, or I don't have capacity to be able to do that at the moment. Maybe somebody asks you to be available outside of your set hours. You can say something like, Unfortunately, I'm not available after 6 p.m., but I can definitely get back to you tomorrow. When somebody pushes back on your boundary, for example, you've set a boundary, you said this is what you're going to do or not do, and then somebody wants to push back on that, you can say, I understand that this is really disappointing, and I'm still not able to do this. I'm still not in a position to be able to deliver on that in that time frame. These are all things I've had to say and examples of things that I've had to, boundaries that I've had to defend. And it doesn't require like an elaborate explanation, justification, apology for having limits. It just needs to be clear, kind, and firm. And so this is what self-leadership is. It's not selfish. It's you leading yourself towards sustainability, you modeling healthy boundaries, and you teaching other people how to respect your capacity. Because sometimes we actually have to teach other people how to interact with us, how to respect those boundaries. This is not easy stuff. I'm telling you, like I have struggled so much with this because naturally you want to help, you want to say yes to all the things, you want to get the opportunities, right? But at what cost is what we need to ask ourselves. So we're shifting our thinking from saying no and having a boundary is not selfish, it's me leading myself well. There's another kind of approach that I am trying out, which is, and I'm going to share it with you, which is sitting with the discomfort of setting those boundaries. Because again, nobody can honestly say to you that when you set a boundary that you are not going to feel a sense of guilt. You're not going to feel like you're letting people down. Of course you will. We already talked about all the reasons why that happens. Setting boundaries does feel uncomfortable because, like we said, you're changing a pattern. You're so used to saying yes. You feel like you're disappointing people by saying no, or you're doing something that you're not used to doing. But again, the discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. So when you set that boundary, don't run from the guilt. Don't think, well, something's wrong with me because I feel guilty. Just sit with it. And notice the feeling. I'm actually feeling a bit guilty right now. Yeah, that's okay. You can name that. You can say, yeah, I'm feeling guilty because I said no to that thing and it just feels uncomfortable for me. And then remind yourself that actually, just because you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that you should say yes, doesn't mean that not having the boundary is the right approach. It just means that you're changing a pattern, you're doing something new and it feels uncomfortable. Because the truth is that if you hold that boundary, the guilt will eventually pass. And then you'll learn that you can actually survive disappointing people. You can actually survive having a boundary. You don't always feel good about having a boundary, right? But it doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do. You can feel a bit guilty and still choose yourself and still say, I'm going to hold this boundary. So I want to talk now about what this is not. Again, like I said, this is not about being selfish. You're not abandoning your responsibilities. You are still fulfilling those. You're not changing your natural tendency to care for people, to help people, to love people. You are not becoming cold and, without care or concern, or none of those things have to be true. This is about including yourself in the conversation, including yourself in the decision, right? In the people who matter. Like you are one of those people who also matters. And it's about protecting your capacity so that you can actually show up where it matters and for who it matters and lead yourself toward a type of success that, one, you're deserving of, but two, is also sustainable, right? Because the truth is that truly, truly selfish people, they don't even reflect or think about the fact that they're being selfish. The fact that you are actually thinking about that means that you are not selfish. You're a kind, considerate person who's thinking about other people and you want to serve other people. So the guilt that you're feeling is actually proof that you care about other people. So the goal isn't to stop caring, right? The goal is to sit with this discomfort, but letting the boundary hold anyway, letting the guilt just exist in the background, but not letting it control the decision itself. So still being able to choose yourself when decisions are tough. For me, this is what self-leadership looks like in practice. Those little moments of choosing yourself and those little micro decisions, protecting your capacity and saying no when you need to. Because you are allowed to have limits. You are allowed to protect your time and energy and what matters, right, in life. You're allowed to protect those things. I always talk about us being the asset. We are the asset in this equation, and we need to protect ourselves as such. And so that's not selfish. That's leading yourself well. That's self-led. And so I just wanted to just reflect on what we've talked about in this episode about shifting our thinking from selfish to self-led when we're talking about setting boundaries, right? And that we ask ourselves in those moments, like, what am I protecting by setting this boundary? What am I sacrificing by not setting this boundary? And can I just sit with the discomfort for a little bit, long enough actually for the boundary to hold, and for me to realize that I can actually set boundaries and I can honor them. I am the kind of person who sets boundaries and honors them. So you don't have to go on a boundary setting rampage or anything like that. Just start to ask yourself, like, what would it look like to choose myself in this situation, whatever that situation might be for you? Is this something that I can challenge myself this week to try and see how it feels? And remember that setting boundaries is an act of self-leadership, and you deserve to lead yourself well. So I hope that this episode has landed for you. I hope that you have been challenged in terms of boundary setting and really kind of enforcing those. It takes a lot of courage to be able to set boundaries and enforce them and honor them. But the payoff is really huge, because you look back on those moments and you realize not only was it scary, but I survived it and I was able to make that decision. I was able to lead myself. And, you know, you can look back on that with so much pride, because you honored something, you honored a commitment that you made to yourself. And so that has been my own experience. I have set so many of these boundaries that previously felt so uncomfortable, being the person who never wanted to let people down and wanting to be all things to all people, and being able to set those boundaries now and reflect on the fact that I was able to actually uphold them feels like a bit of becoming in my own self, that I am becoming the person who achieves sustainable success and who leads myself first and who leads myself gently. And that doesn't require me to abandon other people. It doesn't require me to abandon my responsibilities or not show up for my work and the things that I do within my career. So I feel like this is a bit of a return to the person who's able to do this gracefully, gently, unapologetically. And that is my desire for you, that you will also be able to enforce your own boundaries and do so with grace and courage, and that you will enter into that journey of becoming with confidence and fortitude. And so I hope that that's been helpful. If you have found this episode helpful, I would encourage you to share it with another Scholarly Mama you know, and who you think may want to hear this or need to hear this. And and I will see you in next week's episode. So until next time, Mama, keep leading yourself gently, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, I want you to know this. You don't need to have it all figured out before you take your next step. This work is all about learning to lead yourself first in ways that honor your capacity, your work, your home, and yourself without burning out in the process. If you'd like to continue the conversation beyond the podcast, you're warmly invited to join Scholarly Mamas The Letter, a quiet monthly newsletter for mother scholars who value purpose beyond titles, presence at home, and peace within. You can sign up at scholarlymamas.com. And if you're feeling stuck, stretched, or just not where you want to be, you can book a free 30-minute call to help you gain clarity and explore what support might look like in this season to get from where you are to where you want to be. You can also connect with me on social media at Mrs. Mummy PhD, where I share reflections on ambition, motherhood, sustainable self-leadership, all the things, for high-achieving mamas like yourself. This, Mama, is the quiet work of scholarly motherhood, and these are our journeys of becoming.